Alrighty, well, we're going to begin here. So, a little bit about myself. I know normally you would see Darian do one of these lives, and fortunately, I'm getting the opportunity to start having a little bit of an online presence here and sharing what I do. And so, what I do is my name's Ryan Marsh. I'm Plies Warehouse Implementation Manager. I get the pleasure of traveling the country and helping independent businesses set up their warehouses and implement Ply. So, I get to meet a lot of different customers. I get to be the face for Ply. It's incredibly fun. It's incredibly challenging at times, but it's also every day's unique. So, I mean, what's really fun about it is with meeting all these customers and seeing different warehouses, we get to kind of hone the process of what they do specific to their business. That's a lot of fun. And ultimately, that's what I'm here to kind of present and talk about today is some best practices for the warehouse. So I have about 18 years of experience in supply chain, working for pretty big Fortune 500 companies in the beverage industry and the vitamin industry, and also in the automotive industry. So I've seen a lot of really good processes and robust methods of how to go to business. And so I want to start sharing that with our customers so they can better prepare themselves for Apply implementation. They can better set themselves up for success in the future and continuously improve. So with that said, I'm going to share this presentation and kick it off. So today we're going to focus on industry standard step-by-step process for like setting up your warehouse and building processes for your employees to follow. And now keep in mind that everyone's scale is different. This comes from Toyota's methodology of total production systems, and that started in like the 1950s. So this is really scaled for a large business. So we're going to talk about scaling it for smaller practical businesses. And then we're also going to talk about how we with Ply are developing our own system for this. So I'm going to kick it off. So let's talk about possibly your current situation. Maybe you're struggling to find materials in your warehouse. Maybe you're curious on how to effectively set up your warehouse. Maybe you're just not familiar with warehousing. Maybe you've just signed up for Ply and you want to prepare your warehouse for onboarding the new inventory system. Maybe you're unorganized, right? Maybe you go grab a capacitor, a 3/4, 90 elbow, and it's in a different spot in the warehouse. So maybe you're wondering why those parts are in multiple places. So relax. We're going to share an industry standard method to approach warehouse organization. It's used in the military. It's used in the automotive industry, in all forms of large business. School systems use it. The healthcare industry uses it. It's a methodology to organize, standardize processes, and continuously improve. I'm going to give you a scenario. Whose kitchen can you make a grilled cheese sandwich in fastest? Yours or mine? So this is how 5S was taught to me probably about 18 years ago. And it's not a trick question. Maybe I'll tell you that my kitchen was designed by some award-winning chef, right? Great. It's still not a trick question. The answer is always going to be yours. You know where you put your pans, where you put your spatulas, where you put your ingredients. You don't know where I do that. So to better go to business, you want to build a standard process and an organization system and then share it holistically with your team so they can better function. They can be more efficient at their job. So now what is this system? It's called 5S. It's literally 5 S's to describe what it is. And it's sort, set and order, shine, standardize, and sustain. What do these mean? They're all part of this lean methodology. Like I said, this was created by Toyota in like the 1950s, and it's become worldwide the industry standard. It's used in all countries. It's used everywhere. And it's, once again, how to build continuous improvement, build a good, robust process, reduce waste, and create a safe and efficient environment. So let's dive into what those mean. So sorting is strictly that, like go through your warehouse, remove unnecessary items from the workplace to declutter and create space. Set and order would be the actual organizing and arranging. So coming up with a standard and building it out so that everything is easy to access and use. Shine. Well, this is the clean part, and this is what a lot of people refer to 5S as, is just cleaning, but it's doing that sweep, going through your warehouse and cleaning everything up and making sure things are safe. And now by safe, I mean, maybe you don't want to be storing heavy items on a top shelf because they're liable to fall on somebody. We'll review that a little bit more in depth later, but that's the shine process. Standardize. So that's creating a procedure that keeps all of these, these previous 3 S steps consistent and building a practice to respect them. And then sustain, which that's simply just developing a habit and the actual practice of sustaining the process. So a lot of times that's done through audits. This is much easier to manage with a larger team because you can assign different tasks to different people to make sure that this whole process is respected. So the most popular phrase used with explaining 5S is a place for everything and everything in its place. And this is probably one of my favorite pictures that just speaks to that. And it's called a shadow board. And now shops use this for tools. They use it for parts. In this case, this is used for warehouse cleaning, right? So we have an angle broom, a push broom, 2 different size dustpans, and a counter brush. And I'll be honest, like this is when I'm teaching a team and I've started in a new warehouse, like this is probably it is one of the first things that I like to do and share. And that's because cleaning is really important and it starts to develop that practice and that routine. There's so many times I go into a warehouse and it's like, well, where's the broom? Well, it's over here, but it's supposed to be kept over there. And now it's by the garbage because somebody swept up, threw the garbage away and never put the tools away. This helps you put the tools away. So whenever anyone needs to clean up, they know right where they are. So with that said, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into each one of these S pillars and share some best practices and explain it a little bit more in depth. So sort. So once again, we've talked about removing unnecessary items. Now, going into a lot of warehouses, I see fittings and different materials, parts, or tools that just aren't used. And a lot of customers will tell me, oh, we haven't used that. We don't use this. If that's the case, honestly, look to throw it out, look to sell it and recoup some money. But at the end of the day, don't dedicate key space to this. If you want to save this stuff, put it in a bin, put it in a corner, put it somewhere where it's just not going to be in the way of normal operations. You really want to remove any obstacle or anything that's just not used frequently from your main space. So once again, toss or sell obsolete material, evaluate your organization. Is each item in its own bin? Are small items in large bins? Like let's look to put the large items in the large bin and the small items in the small bin, and then work to organize your warehouse from that way. Are materials in multiple locations? Now this, coming from very large warehouses, we have materials in so many locations because at that point, it's just going and getting more of it. It doesn't need to all be in one spot. What I find most effective for smaller businesses is put the item in one spot. There's constant times that I go to a warehouse and they say, well, we put those fittings here, but we also put them here. It just generates more chance for error or an unknown of where the material actually is. It's better to keep all like materials with all like materials. So the next step would be set in order. So after you sort, you want to start organizing. These processes do kind of work in tandem or in parallel, but this is where you're going to look to label different storage areas, maybe color code. This is where we talk about aisle bay, level and bin schema for organization and more labeling. Focus on that in another time. But this is where you really want to optimize your space. So a lot of times customers have a drop-off area where they pick their materials for their techs. That's a lot of larger customers. Smaller customers, it's your techs actually coming in to pick the materials for their trucks. So you want to understand the frequency of item movement and where you can better place the items that are grabbed all the time compared to the slow movers. And now this is not something that happens right off the bat. If you have that holistic knowledge, you can do it right away. But what the whole point of this process is it's reoccurring. So it's constant evaluation of your process, of your space, and working to make it better. So a lot of big warehouses always have a big map of where everything's located. So I would challenge anyone to map out your warehouse. It could be on the back of a napkin if it's a small warehouse and you just want to start thinking. This is a rough draft. It doesn't need to be published. It's just something to understand your space and start to lay things out. Do you have zones? Thinking about larger companies that might be in multiple business segments from like plumbing, heating, cooling, and electrical, you should probably have zones within your warehouse. There's no reason to have plumbing parts intermixed with electrical parts. That's just not all that common that the guys are going to need both of those. When it comes to drainage fittings and all that, I think it's acceptable to have the HVAC guys go into the plumbing area and grab those few fittings. So that way they're always in one spot rather than, so you have the bulk of all your material in one location. So also let's talk about maybe receiving. Do you have a receiving area? Staging would be for, like I said, where your techs pick stuff up. Staging area can also function as a return area. There might be a case where a tech goes out to a job and needs a place to put, the job's canceled, something changes. They don't want to carry that material around because it was specific to that one job. You want to offer them a place where it's easy to return. So either you, your warehouse staff, or just the techs in general that are in your warehouse know hey, if this is put back here, it's a return. That's why I say staging, because typically if there's a small area where you put each tech's item, items for the day, then that becomes their return area because they know that that's theirs. No one else is going to take it. Once again, evaluating frequency of material usage. Like I said, this is an ongoing process. So it's not so much knowing exactly where everything needs to be the first time you start implementing this process. It's meant to be continuous. You're meant to revisit it 6 months, a year later. For massive organization, bigger sites, they could revisit this daily, weekly. It just depends on your staffing, the amount of time you want to dedicate to it. So shine. Now this is the cleaning step, right? So having a clean workplace, overall, it really boosts morale, right? People aren't walking through clutter. People aren't having to dig things out to get what they need. While you're working to clean, this is where you can start to review some of the setting in order or the sorting processes, so you can better understand how things are being respected as you're continually cleaning your warehouse. That's evaluate the material organization. Also, attention to uniformity. So a lot of times customers will, I'll see visiting a warehouse, they'll have areas that are all set up one way, and then you go to the next area and it's completely different. And to the average user, that's kind of confusing. You want to look to make sure that, if you always have large items on the bottom and small items on top, and then you go to the next section and it's large items on top, small items on bottom, it questions, attention to detail, and then also safety. That's the biggest call out there. So then standardizing. So this is not only just standardized bins or labeling. This is actually the procedure that you want to share with your team. So whether it's checklists, visual aids, writing standard operating procedures, SOPs, it's to build a consistent, safe practice to allow for identifying and addressing any kind of issues that arise while you're reviewing your space. So it's sharing the knowledge of how the space is organized. So going back to the kitchen scenario, making a grilled cheese sandwich, it's where does the pan go? Where does the spatula go? Where are the ingredients stored? And once that's consistent and everyone knows how to find those items, they stay there. Everything, a place for everything in its place. Developing a process for your team to adhere to. So be it scale of team, small teams, large teams, regardless, you want to have a process in place to maintain that. And that's teaching the team to respect the organization, teaching the team to, when they pull material, where they pull material, where they place it, if it's directly onto the truck, if it's a staging area for the techs, it's what is that process and do we adhere to that process? So sustain, this is the last of the S steps. And so that's maintaining the system. So once again, you've done the standardization, you've built out what those processes are. Now this is the expectation of how often you're revisiting and how often you're adhering to those processes. Ideally, it's daily. For smaller businesses, that I can understand that's a struggle. So it's walking the warehouse with your team as a weekly audit, a daily audit, a bi-weekly audit, monthly, whatever works for you. Challenging yourself and your team to find better ways to better the current process, and then revisiting a challenging area. Maybe you're not happy with the way materials flow from receiving to being put away. Maybe you're just not happy where certain materials are stored because they might be further in the back and they're what's frequently used. So right then and there, you've identified a hiccup in the step that you're going to work to address, and maybe do some reorganization to make everything more user-friendly. And are you identifying more material that's not needed? And has something else become obsolete? Has something else come out that you're using on the daily that's replaced another material, tool, whatever? Maybe you can find a new place for that, put it towards the back. Maybe you just don't need it anymore and you stop carrying it. You look to return it to your vendor. Maybe it's better bin alternatives. Maybe the sky's the limit. And when you're actually reviewing and deciding how to better your business. So I'll pause there. I don't know if there's any questions. I'll pull up. No, I don't see anything at the moment. So with that said, that was the 5S process. Now I've had the fortunate chance to use a thesaurus a little bit and develop that into what we're going to start calling the ply process. And so it stems from 5S, but it's made to be a little bit more simpler for smaller businesses that can scale it better on their own. And so what does that look like? So we're going to call it ply. And the three pillars are going to be PL and Y. And it's a modern warehouse methodology for cleaning, organizing, and having accountable operations. So it's simply going to be purge, locate, and then yours. So what does that look like? Purging, well, that's the same thing as sorting and setting in order for the most part. It's removing what doesn't move. So remove damaged equipment, excess materials that you aren't using. This is clearing your aisles, your shelves, and your workstations to ensure safe operations. So be it once again, like fittings that are obsolete. I look at a lot of plumbing houses still have like slip fittings. Let's get those towards the back, or let's look to recoup some money for that copper or whatever it is that you have on hand, and have a streamlined inventory that's friendly for your team to access. Now locate. So this is the set in order part. So that's putting everything in its place with a purpose. So organizing all your remaining items in a logical and accessible layout, storing tools and inventory where you need them most, visual cues or defined zones. This is back to like a warehouse map and understanding where you want to locate everything for efficient use. And then the last part is taking the shine, the standardize, and the sustain and making it more accessible to you. And so that's owning, we call it owning the process in a way that works for you, yours. And this is where I want to be really empathetic to customers that are very small, because I go to sites where there is no warehouse team, but you want to keep the warehouse organized. So it's building a checklist of responsibilities for a big team, or it's having maybe a monthly warehouse walk for a very small team just to ensure that your techs are pulling and respecting the space, and you're scaling it to the needs of your business to make sure that you're sustaining your warehouse and your operation the way that you see fit. So this is going to be shared. We'll work on publishing this in the future. And this is the kind of like the training deck that we'll have for the ply process. And so the objectives of understanding the system, how to apply it to your warehouse from a solo small team to a larger scale team with one warehouse or multiple warehouses with warehouse managers and staff, how to develop habits for success, and fostering a good culture to make sure that everyone, one, is, accountable to maintaining these processes, and two, respecting the space and keeping improving. So once again, what is ply? It's a modern framework adapted from the 5S method, and it's built for a real warehouse environment. It's meant to be flexible and scalable to match your business, not to force you into one mold. I find the 5S process is really good and robust for very large businesses and production sites and really huge warehouses. Once again, being empathetic to the small customer, we feel this is a good fit for more independent businesses to better scale to their size. And so purge, once again, eliminate clutter and obstacles to your flow. Locate, that's organizing for good, easy access and efficiency. And then yours, that's the team taking the ownership, you taking the ownership, and building a habit to sustain the system. So we're going to exhaust purge a little bit more. So this is, clearing out what doesn't add value, as I've talked about already. This is going to be a little redundant, but I just want to share all this information as I've been building this program. Some key actions for purging would be, once again, identifying low movement SKUs or unused supplies, marking items for disposal, relocation, or repurposing, cleaning your work area, and removing safety hazards. For small teams, it's keeping this simple. It's maybe a weekly 10-minute audit, rolling shelf by shelf sweep, or just something that fits your business that's not going to cost your team too much time, as you have a lot of service calls or whatever. For larger teams that have actual warehouse staff, that's going through, walking the warehouse and understanding like where clutter is, where trash is, and then taking it out, moving it, cleaning the space, and then assessing material usage and needs. So locating, once again, this is putting everything in a place where it belongs. So this is going back to the warehouse map, about creating logical zones for receiving, picking, packing, where your tools go, whatever you want to call those zones. Labels, color codes, signage. Once again, we really recommend the aisle bay level bin schema and understanding where your aisles are so you can really narrow down the finding of the material, and then optimizing your shelf and your bin layouts for flow. So once again, like large items and large bins, preferably at the bottom for safety, smaller items and smaller bins, preferably up higher since they're typically small items are pretty light. What does this look like for a small team? This is just, labeling what's essential, keeping your paths clear and, organizing your tools. Maybe it's by task. Maybe it's if you do have a diverse business where you're in multiple fields from like plumbing, electrical, having different zones for all of that. And then for larger teams, once again, I think this is where the map really comes into play, is training your team on what the true layout of the warehouse is, and then creating an audit process and tying into that audit process. That's really yours. And that's how do you make all this work stick and make it, make a process that's robust enough to ensure all the time that you've spent on sorting and organizing and locating all the material in your warehouse, it's respected over time, and you don't take a step back from that. So be it set daily routines, weekly routines, monthly routines, whatever would work for you given the size and scope of your business. Obviously involving your team. If it's a small warehouse and your techs are pulling the material, involve them on walking the warehouse maybe once a month and question them, pulse them. Does this work? Does this not work? What do you think would be better? At the end of the day, the less time the techs are in the warehouse pulling their material, if you're a really small business, the more time they're actually out on the road completing service calls. Checklists, visuals, or any kind of training refreshers. So, this is where when you develop the process, whatever your standard procedure is, whatever you want to have your team be taught and respect, visuals help, checklists really help. We'll talk about that on the next slide. For small teams, maybe it's just a small dry erase board and you just assign certain tasks and people check it off. Hey, this month you need to do this month you need to do that to help maintain the space. For larger teams, this is where, you would really assign like a key captains for certain areas, and maybe even look to rotate those responsibilities. So if it's if you have a large warehouse staff, maybe it's a manager and a couple people pulling and sorting material every day for the techs, assign everyone a task for 3 months. And then after 3 months, then swap those tasks. So everyone's responsible for a different area at the end of the year, and you get some different input on what people are saying to better build efficiencies within your warehouse and your business. So what would ply in action look like? In brief, if you're going to kick off a process like this, I'll talk about change management, another one of these webinars. I look forward to sharing best practices on how to share change with your team. But in brief, you would want to do a kickoff. You would want to build out some of these expectations beforehand as a business owner or manager, and then kind of have a small kickoff where you're explaining what the expectations are, what you're looking to be doing over the course of the next week, month, to start bringing these processes into your business. Start with a pilot area, like one zone. If you have a larger business where maybe there's plumbing, electrical, and HVAC, maybe just do it with the electrical team. For a small business, maybe just look at doing certain fittings, or, if you're an electrical business, let's just do all your capacitors first, or HVAC, or if you're plumbing, maybe just pick copper pro press fittings or something, just so you're not overwhelming your team, but you're starting with something and then you're going to continue going from there. Show you a sample checklist next, and then, look to schedule reviews. So often weeks would be suggested for a larger team, maybe monthly for a smaller team. Now, what would a checklist look like? So here's an example. If you have issues with like people just leaving stuff in aisles, are walkways clear? If maybe when the team restocks stuff, they don't throw the trash away. So are we removing any excess packaging? Maybe we're putting fittings back in a bin and it's 10 fittings in a bag, but all the other fittings are dumped out loose. Well, we want to ensure that all the fittings are then dumped out. Why would we leave it in a bag to risk somebody grabbing that bag and saying, oh, I took one, but the one's actually 10. That's what that might look like. Our tools return. So if a tech signs out a tool and brings it back, does it go where you want that tool actually stored? Are all your labels and signs visible? Are all your barcodes on your bins still intact? You've called aisle one, or aisle A. Did you put a sign on it? Is it still there? Does the team know how to go find material? And then maybe make a list, or a small notes section for improvements. So this is where you would challenge your team to say, like, do we need new bin labels? Do we, which is the example shown here. Maybe they're seeing that once again, there's some heavier materials. Someone put a bunch of motors on the top shelf. All right, maybe we want to look to roll those to the bottom shelves. That's what that would look like. So in brief, I know I've thrown a lot of process mythology at everyone. I want to give it a chance for questions again. Well, with that said, I'm gonna work with the team on where we'll put up the apply process to share, and we're going to start incorporating this more with our on-sites and our rollouts. And that really concludes what I had to share with everyone today. Hope you all have a good holiday weekend, and I look forward to doing this again. Thank you.